Hey everyone, welcome back to Breakthrough Innovation, where we uncover what it really takes to lead change, create value, and build what's next. I'm JL Heather, one of the leaders of Centered, a firm that helps organizations navigate complexity, spark creativity, and unlock the full potential of their teams through innovation coaching and strategy. Today's guest brings a fresh perspective, bold structure, and a radically practical approach to nonprofit transformation. We're excited to welcome Kate Viana, founder of Viana Communications, a four-brand ecosystem built specifically for nonprofits. Kate isn't just offering another consulting service, she's architecting a scalable solution to the internal dysfunction quietly derailing some of the most mission-driven organizations in the world. Through brands like Non-Toxic Nonprofits, OpsScale, and Nonprofitext, and Viana Social, she's addressing what others ignore: the systems, communication, and culture issues that make or break nonprofit impact. And Kate, we love talking about culture here, so I'm really excited. And yeah, I'd love to welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much. Great, glad to be here.
Awesome. So maybe the best way to jump in is maybe to talk a little bit about what you do and how you do it. Because I know a lot of founders really struggle to communicate their model, whether they're nonprofit or not, when that model doesn't fit in a neat box. So, how do you talk about Viana Communications in a way that helps people just kind of get it, like that it makes sense?
That's a great question to start with. And we're still figuring that out in some ways. I'll be very honest with you because a lot of people aren't talking about this stuff. It really gets overshadowed by things like fundraising and marketing and, that sort of thing. But basically, Viana Communications was created to be scalable, whether you're, one person nonprofit, it's just the executive director, or you've got, dozens of employees and a $10 million budget. And what we do is we help you basically with communications every step of the way. So if you're, like I said, really small in the beginning, we have templates that you can use so that you're not sitting down, having writing an original email every time you need to talk to a board member, for example, or send out a fundraising appeal. As you get a little bit bigger, we meet you with Viana social media, which is very high impact but affordable marketing, specifically for small and mid-sized nonprofits. As you get a little bit bigger, you might notice that you're starting to have some cultural issues. Almost all nonprofits do. In 14 years, I've never known one that didn't. And then we bring in non-toxic nonprofits and we work to align with your leadership, with your staff, and fix your internal communication. And then finally, OpsScale is kind of like the top, and that is where we come in and we fix or we nurture existing systems to make sure that the culture stays on track, internal communication stays on track, and that everything is well positioned to thrive.
Well, I like that. That nice four-tiered system. It's interesting listening to you talk about some of this because I feel like some of the problems you're talking about are not specific to nonprofits,
No.
even if the solutions might be a little tailored in that direction. Because I haven't seen any big company that doesn't have at least a little bit of a culture problem here or there. Awesome. So, given that you've kind of worked across every corner of the nonprofit sector, consultant, staffer, board member, all of it, what are the patterns that you see that keep just repeating that tell you something is broken? Like, what are the things that people should look for?
It's really subtle. And I think a lot of the time, if you just look at a given organization, just look at it quickly, you would say, well, there's nothing really wrong with this. As a matter of fact, most of the executive directors I've worked with in my career would tell you, no, we're good. We're raising money. We don't have turnover's not crazy. We have good attendance at our events, for example. But the things that really signal cracks in cultural or communication foundations at a nonprofit are things that you have to be on the lookout for. And that is things like, how do people respond when the executive director speaks? How does the executive director address staff? How do board members respond when they're asked to participate in fundraising? How do different departments interact? Are they working together efficiently? That kind of thing. And there's obviously a whole lot that goes into it, but it's all quite subtle. When it gets overt, anyone can see that. It's when it's, still fixable that it's subtle.
Well, it's always interesting to me. There's a lot of organizational momentum at play, I think, in a lot of organizations, nonprofit or otherwise. Again, I don't have a ton of experience on the nonprofit side. So if I'm ever talking, and it doesn't make sense, let me know. But I do think a lot of organizations get so used to the way things feel, let alone the way things work, that it's very easy to become overly accepting of something that is at a minimum suboptimal.
Yeah. It is. It's really easy to do that, and I will say in the nonprofit world, like I said, can't really speak to for profit, but in the nonprofit world, people get involved because they care. No one's in this sector to get rich, right? So when they nonprofit staffers or leadership really, when they identify that the people who are in a position to make a difference aren't going to take action, they just leave. And, that's what we want to prevent, right? Because when people leave, they take institutional knowledge, they take relationships, they take all sorts of valuable resources that organizations need to thrive and grow and move forward.
Yeah. And maybe worst of all, they take their passion with them.
They
I
do.
mean, that's a problem in the corporate world. I'm sure it's 10 times the problem in the nonprofit world when someone leaves like that.
Yeah. It really is because, nonprofits depend in very large part on the passion of their staff members to, quote unquote, sell their mission.
So it almost sounds to me like part of what you help nonprofit organizations do is see the potential that maybe they've been blind to in the past.
That's one good way of putting it. Yeah, I think people get so in the nonprofit world, they get so laser focused on the mission, whatever it is. Just for example, animal welfare. That's one of my heart causes. And people get so focused in that little subsector on let's save the dogs, let's find foster homes, let's get animals spayed and neutered. They get so focused on that they forget, well, you actually do still have to work with and communicate with other human beings.
Yeah.
This has to be a good place to work in order for people to stick around and do their best work. So, mission centrism, very positive. I love it. That's one of the things that I preach with my clients over and over and over. But you can't let mission centrism overpower, the very real need to have a harmonious culture and good communication between staff.
And to just run a business. We talk a
Mhm.
lot with entrepreneurs. And one of the things we find over and over again, engineers have some of the best ideas. But when they go out into the world to start their own company, it almost always fails because a good idea isn't enough.
Yeah.
A strong mission isn't enough. You have to run
Yep.
a business.
Exactly. Yeah. And you have to account for, unfortunately, you have to account for, if you have an organization with, say, 25 staff members, you've got 25 different opinions about how things should work. You've got 25 different ways of communicating, 25 different attitudes toward, emojis, for example. I mean, seriously, it sounds a
Yeah.
little silly, but there's all these moving parts. And if you don't address them very intentionally, you will end up with foundational cracks that will be very costly and time consuming to fix.
No, that makes complete sense. And I'm curious, like, I don't know how much, well, let me reframe that. I don't know what competition looks like in the nonprofit space. In the corporate world, it's very clear, right? Like, there's only so many customers, market share is a thing. Is there a similar kind of view in the nonprofit space, like competition for donations, competition for space? Like, what does that look like? How does that work?
Fundraising is not my specialty, but I will say yes, there definitely is. And I think that, again, I'll use the example of animal welfare. That market is pretty saturated, and so are things like healthcare, charity healthcare. I have a really big charity healthcare client, and they have 100 different clinics that they work with all around the state. And so, in those sectors that are kind of saturated, it really just depends on what the organization is doing that happens to resonate with you. For example, all other things being equal, you're going to go with the organization that has a lower kill rate, for example, or you really enjoy their annual gala, or their social media person is funny, right? So it really depends, but that's definitely the competition is real for sure.
Or their impact is bigger?
That's
I
yeah.
am curious. So, given that, what does innovation look like in a nonprofit context? Because I know, budgets are always tight, and it sounds like there is competition for donations, volunteers. I think teams are consistently probably overworked because they have so much passion. So in that space, like, what does the innovation look like? How does it function? What do you see?
In my opinion, innovation in the nonprofit space actually does mean prioritizing, not just saying you prioritize, but actually prioritizing your people. I mean, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are carrying out the mission. They're talking to the stakeholders, selling the mission, soliciting sponsorships. They're doing the boots on the ground work. And if you're not consciously and constantly investing in them, whether that means, being flexible with work location or hours or, providing opportunities for upward mobility. If you're not consciously and constantly doing that, you're going to fall behind. There's just no way to stay ahead because, like I said, no one comes into this sector to get rich. You might lure someone away with a higher salary, but ultimately what people in this sector want is a healthy place to work with good systems where they don't have to go home every day and, complain to their spouse that, there's toxicity and they have to deal with crazy emails and.
Yeah. If you want to keep your best people, you got to make sure that they have an environment where they can grow.
Right. And, a big part of that is asking them what they want and what they need and
Right.
actually listening to the answer. And that's something that a lot of leaders struggle with, unfortunately.
Well, and it is interesting. I know when we talk innovation in the corporate world, a lot of what we talk about it is the good ideas come from everyone. And having systems in place, not so everything can be decided by committee, but so the best ideas can kind of float to the top. When you're in that nonprofit space, what are some of those signs that that culture isn't there to let the ideas float up to the top, the good ideas to float up to the top? Or maybe let's make it even more generic. What are some of the signs that the culture is the thing that's holding them back?
The number one thing, a predictor in my experience, is leadership misalignment or just poor leadership. None of my clients like to hear this, but culture starts at the top. So, executive directors, yes, they are chief fundraisers. Yes, they're the board liaison. They have all these hats. They're also the cultural custodian. They hate to hear that, but it's absolutely true. It all starts at the top. And so what they model, what they encourage, is going to be what, as you said, sort of trickles down to the staff. So it's
Right.
up to them to create systems or endorse systems, that are presented to them that enable what you said, having those ideas come to the top, creating and nurturing a culture in which people feel free to express their ideas, and they have reason to believe that the idea will be listened to, thoughtfully, critically, and evaluated and not just ignored.
And it's something that I'm sure it's hard to do when you're in the forest, right? Like you can't see the forest for the trees. And I know something you've been talking about is how nonprofits are hiring consultants is a little bit on the broken side. So maybe what is wrong with that process and how do you come in and help executives see the forest rather than the trees?
Well, when it comes to nonprofit consultants, and I know many of them, and they're all extremely talented, but they 99% of the time they're coming in to solve kind of like a single problem. Launch this fundraising campaign, or figure out our tech stack, or whatever. But that's not really that's not strategic, right? It's kind of a patchwork approach to fixing things. And like you could launch a fundraising campaign and okay, the fundraising campaign is launched, but you still have the cultural toxicity. You still have the poor communication patterns. You still have all these things that go unaddressed. And so, in my opinion, we are different. Viana Communications is different because we're looking sort of holistically at what's happening inside the organization. And we are responding with practical and scalable solutions for where they are right now. Not, I've certainly had clients try to sort of copy and paste, for example, a fundraising event from another organization onto theirs, and it doesn't work. It doesn't fit. And it could be the same thing for any other element of the organization. You have to sort of start where you are and be realistic about where you can be. Our 4 brands kind of allow nonprofits to, or they allow us to meet nonprofits where they are without overprescribing or patchworking, like I said.
Well, it kind of sounds like what you're saying is a lot of consultants are very tactical. We're going to solve this one
Yeah.
thing, this one problem in this moment. Whereas what Viana Communications does is more strategic, long-term engagement. Like we're going to help you as you grow and figure out how you can grow and make it through some of these plateaus where other people get stuck.
That is part of it. We certainly do like to engage long term with nonprofits, but we also are all about just positioning organizations to be able to take those next steps. So, for example, if I have someone come to me, an executive director says, "Hey, we need to figure out a CRM. We need to figure out, an email marketing system or whatever." My first step is not going to be, "Oh, let me go Google what's the best CRM." That's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk to them about their existing communication staff, communication systems, their habits. How often are you doing this? How often are you doing that? Not just that. How do your departments communicate? Is your comms department, for example, is it like pulling teeth to get updates from the rest of the departments? Because
Right.
that's all part of it. And I get those pieces of information, and they all inform how we proceed with the engagement, basically, because you're telling me you need A, and I'm saying, "Absolutely, I will help you with A." But as I'm doing that, I'm seeing that you also need to address B and C.
Right.
Like, yeah, because we can, like I said, obviously we can implement whatever you like, but We don't want to just put this in place and walk away. We want to make sure that you're foundationally sound so that you can sustain the changes that we make and the systems we put in place.
No, I think that's great. I mean, it's the difference between just selling a solution and actually solving a problem. One, you can do it anytime. The other, you actually have to understand the problem first.
Exactly.
So I love that approach. And it sounds like you have a really great approach to all this. So I'm curious, what do you still need? Like, what would help you scale your impact?
We are still very much in a building phase. And so, like any other founder, of course, capital would be nice.
Yeah.
But, other than that, I really would like to be I would love to hear from consultants and other nonprofit consultants, people like me or who think similarly, to sort of start creating a pool of contractors in a way, because I'm just one person. I cannot do all of these different things. And I've got a few people here in Atlanta that are fantastic and just chomping at the bit, ready to go. Diversity is incredibly important to me, especially diversity of perspectives. And so, what I need right now is to hear from other consultants, possibly their take on our approach, as well as maybe their interest in being, like I said, and working with us in the future.
No, I love that. So maybe to wrap things up here, I'd love to maybe get a view of the future and see what do you think is going to be changing 10 years from now? And how do you feel like small, mid-sized nonprofits might be operating differently?
Well, I want to answer that by saying I do a lot of training on intergenerational communication and multi-gen communication, specifically in nonprofits. And I will say that Gen Z is going to turn everything on its head in the nonprofit, probably the for-profit world too. And I love that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
absolutely love that for them. They are not afraid to prioritize themselves as individuals, but they also take a lot of pride and joy in prioritizing their team. So I think that is going to be a big, big part of how nonprofits look in the next 10 years because they're just not going to accept, work 100 hours a week for $40,000 a year. They're not going to. So the sector is going to have to
absolutely.
change regardless, right? But other than that, I want to see these small and mid-sized nonprofits stop operating from a place of burnout and scarcity. I wanna see them get rid of, like, we just work and work and work off passion until we're exhausted and burned out, and people are quitting and everyone's frustrated. I really wanna see that happen. And I guess this is gonna kinda, out me as a millennial, but I really wanna see I really wanna see a nonprofit world in which, you know, no one's making memes about nonprofit dysfunction, or very few people are. I want to that's really how big an impact I would love for Viana Communications to have. I want it to totally revolutionize the way nonprofits not only are run, but built, how we think about their foundation from day one. I want people to start prioritizing the people that they bring in. I want them to start really thinking about putting good systems in place and not just thinking money, 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 fundraising, gala, all that. Because you do need money. I'm not downplaying that at all. But you have to have good people. You have to have solid systems. 100%.
I love it. So, Kate, if anyone's looking to get into contact with you to collaborate with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Sure. Yeah, very simple. So our website is just vianacommunications.com, and my email is kate@vianacommunications.com. Very simple.
Awesome. So, Kate, thank you so much for your time today. I've loved the conversation. I think there's probably a surprising amount of, or maybe not surprising amount of overlap between some of the things that people struggle with in the nonprofit world versus the corporate world. So, yeah, that's exciting. For everyone else who made it all the way to the end, I want to thank you as well. And I want to encourage you, if you know anyone who's in that nonprofit space, any of the consultants that Kate mentioned earlier, share this episode with them, spread the wealth, introduce them to Kate, and maybe help create some of those connections. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. What are your struggles in the nonprofit space? Where do you feel like more value could be created? And where do you feel like Viana Communications might be able to help a little bit? We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to make some connections. And we'd love to get a review from you as well before you leave. That said, again, Kate, thank you so much for your time. Everyone else, thank you for being here. And we'll see you all next time on Breakthrough Innovation.